How close we are to a passwordless future amid the rapidly growing account takeover. Well, this comes after the South African office of the Banking Ombudsman sending another warning to people, to be on a high alert for phishing and vishing attempts. To tell us more about this, we are joined by Entersekt's Vice President of Products at Authentication and Mobile App Security Provider, Simon Armstrong. Simon, a very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to Morning Live.
Good morning. It's great to be here.
Tell us more about why you say that we are very close to a passwordless future. What does that mean?
Well, a passwordless future is one where we don't rely on the same old way of getting access to our digital lives. A password has been the way that we access any of our accounts online, be it our bank accounts or even our emails. And we know that there's problems with passwords. I know I've forgotten mine more than once, and that's a very common thing that happens. In fact, some of the research we've done says that people have an average of 100 online accounts, but simply reuse the same 4 or 5 passwords across multiple of those accounts. And this is very risky, obviously. At Entersekt, where we believe in keeping people safe online, we know that 80% of data breaches result from these weak or reused credentials.
Now, let's talk about the account takeover that is growing rapidly. I understand that it hiked from 34% in 2019 to 54% last year. Tell us more about this.
This is a really scary statistic, and we know that there are people out there who want to get access to our money. And these fraudsters are finding new ways to exploit the cracks in security. One of the mechanisms they use is once they've gained access to your account through cracking your passwords or obtaining it from a data breach elsewhere, they then have access to be able to instigate transactions. And what we found is that the attacks are becoming more sophisticated, even at times calling a person, pretending to represent the bank, and then guiding them through actually defrauding themselves, which is a very scary reality. And, it's a good reminder for us to say that it's important that we make sure that we always contact the bank to verify anything that they're claiming. But the reality is that another mechanism that we can use, or another defense that we have against this sort of attack, is by diversifying the kind of authentication we use to access our accounts. What we believe is that by combining multiple factors of authentication, a password is something that you know, biometrics is something that you are. So this would be your fingerprint, a facial scan, or even the signature of your voice as you're speaking. Combining that with a strong device ID, an anchor point of something that we all have in our pockets, a smartphone, allows us to create a greater network of security. And by using these 2 factors of authentication, we can secure people's accounts more effectively.
And you say that the average Joe or the average Jane today has more than 100 online accounts, but only 4 or 5 passwords that they simply reuse. And this is quite a risk, isn't it?
It is indeed. And that's why we insist on saying that stronger forms of authentication that cannot be stolen, that cannot be cracked, are ideal. In fact, we're looking at new and innovative ways that we can employ biometric capabilities in the fight against this fraud. Looking at things like the way that you interact with your device as an indication of whether you are the person you claim. And by this, I mean simply the way that you type or the way that you swipe on your phone has a very unique pattern. And when we combine these indicating factors of whether or not we're dealing with the right person with strong authentication factors like the fingerprints and facial scans, we're able to create a much more complete picture of exactly who's interacting on this digital channel to make sure that we keep the bad guys out.
Now, talk to us, if you can, Simon Armstrong, about how new devices now come standard with fingerprint, face, voice, and even retinal scanning, and how this will bring us closer to the passwordless future.
Well, I think it's become increasingly common that we know when we're interacting with our phone that the way that we unlock this device is to simply use our fingerprint. or our facial scan. Although in COVID times with a mask, unlocking a phone with a facial scan is becoming a bit more difficult. But we know that these are patterns of interaction, and these are capabilities that our devices are coming with more often. Even laptops and other sort of computers are often being released with a fingerprint scanner that can be used to unlock that device. These capabilities are only increasing as we find greater interaction in our lives with new forms of technology. We're going to see more and more of these capabilities emerging. I alluded earlier to the using your voice as a way that you could authenticate yourself, and we know already that products like Amazon's Alexa allow us to simply interact with our voice, and that's enough for a unique identifier that we can be sure that the way that we interact is secure.
And how should we opt into multi-factor authentication on all our accounts and use banking apps for quicker and safer logins?
Well, that's exactly it. We know that in order to implement multi-factor authentication, or in order to increase the security, it requires collaboration between both the organization, the financial institution itself, and their customers. We obviously work with both sides of this picture to try and encourage them to, if you're a consumer, to opt into any multi-factor authentication that an organization provides. And we hold multiple conversations with the financial institutions across South Africa and globally to encourage them to implement the standards that we know create greater security. In fact, internationally, we are seeing more and more regulatory bodies actually enforcing strong customer authentication by law. A great example of this would be in Europe, where they've passed a regulation called PSD2, which insists on the strong customer authentication.
So what are your thoughts on how effective the OTP or the one-time PIN has been? Because since it's sent to my cell phone, one can always easily share it with other people.
Well, that is one problem. One of the most common attacks we see with the one-time PIN that gets sent as an SMS is the SIM swap attack. And this is one that actually was most prevalent actually in our country and in regions that have a similar sort of demographic to South Africa. And the basic attack here is if someone is able to SIM swap your number onto a different device and then receive that OTP, they can gain access to your account. And the way that we believe we can prevent against this is obviously by detecting whether or not a SIM swap has occurred and preventing that SMS OTP to go out. But ultimately, as I said, this is using only one factor of authentication, where that SIM card that you're using is actually the possession factor, and we're using that to deliver a one-time PIN across to a user. And so it is effective, but I think in all cases, we're going to try and encourage that more than one factor of authentication is used. And if at all possible, we'd like them to be sent on more than one channel. So if you're interacting on your laptop or on a computer, we believe that the authentication should come through another channel, like through to your phone or some other area where you're able to connect on multiple angles.
Okay, Simon, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We appreciate your thoughts and for your reflections on this matter.
It's been great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Okay, thank you. Simon Armstrong there is Entersekt's Vice President of Products at Authentication and mobile app security provider, and he joined us this morning to talk about how close we are to saying goodbye to passwords. And speaking of goodbye,